Picture a man standing in front of a decision he knows matters. Should he start the business, send the message, leave the dead path, commit to the body, build the skill, speak the truth, take the risk, or cut the distraction that has been feeding on him for years? Before he chooses, the brain begins simulating consequences. What if it fails? What if people laugh? What if money is lost? What if the timing is wrong? What if another option is better? What if the wrong door closes the right one forever? The body receives all these simulations as pressure, and instead of producing clear fear, it produces fatigue, because fatigue becomes the perfect excuse to postpone danger while preserving self-image. He does not have to call himself a coward. He can simply say he is drained. He can scroll for relief, nap for relief, reorganize his notes for relief, watch videos about the decision for relief, and by night he can tell himself that tomorrow will be more suitable. Tomorrow usually brings the same fog, because the fog was never about energy. It was the nervous system avoiding uncertainty. A decision with unclear outcomes threatens the ego because it removes the luxury of looking intelligent from a distance. Planning allows you to feel wise. Research allows you to feel responsible. Talking about the goal allows you to feel close to action without exposing yourself to the consequences of action. Choosing is different. Choosing closes doors. Choosing creates evidence. Choosing takes the fantasy out of your mind and places it under the judgment of reality. That is why the body resists, not because the task is always too difficult, but because the decision transforms potential into accountability. Once you decide, the excuse of possibility begins dying. You are no longer the man who could do it someday. You become the man either doing it or avoiding it. Many people prefer the comfort of remaining untested because untested potential can still be romanticized. Action ruins that illusion. It brings measurement. It brings feedback. It brings possible humiliation. So the nervous system whispers fatigue before the truth can demand movement. This matters because the average life is often not built by laziness alone. It is built by decisions postponed until they lose emotional force, ambitions delayed until they become embarrassing to mention, and opportunities avoided until the mind rewrites avoidance as maturity. A man waits to feel up to it before beginning, not realizing the feeling he is waiting for may only appear after beginning. Energy often follows action. Clarity often follows movement. Confidence often follows evidence. Yet the untrained nervous system demands these things up front like entry fees, and because they are absent, the man assumes the timing is wrong. He keeps waiting for a clean internal signal while his life becomes shaped by indecision. The body learns that uncertain choices can be escaped through exhaustion. The mind learns that fog protects it from exposure. The future learns that no important decision can survive the first wave of discomfort. This is how a person becomes stuck while still feeling constantly busy, constantly tired, constantly close to change, but never quite entering it. The deeper mechanism is cruel, because avoidance gives immediate relief, and the brain mistakes relief for wisdom when the pain decreases quickly enough. You postpone the decision, and the pressure drops. You open the phone, and the mind receives stimulation. You take the nap, and the body escapes the choice. You tell yourself you will return later, and the ego feels protected, because technically the dream has not been abandoned, only delayed. Yet this relief teaches the nervous system a dangerous lesson. It teaches that avoiding uncertain choices works. It teaches that tiredness is a useful exit. It teaches that difficulty can be postponed without consequence, even though the consequence is quietly accumulating beneath the surface. Every time you escape a decision through false fatigue, the next decision feels heavier. Every delayed choice becomes another piece of evidence that uncertainty is too large for you to face directly. The cage tightens through relief, not pain. Look at the pattern inside ordinary life, and it becomes unmistakable. A man wants to improve his body, but deciding on the routine feels overwhelming, so he spends weeks comparing programs instead of training. Another wants to build income, but choosing one offer, one platform, one skill, or one market feels dangerous. So he keeps learning generally while producing nothing specifically. Another wants to fix a relationship, but the conversation could go badly. So he waits for the perfect mood while resentment grows in silence. Another wants to leave a miserable path, but the alternative feels uncertain. So he stays inside the known prison and calls it responsibility. In each case, the mind pretends the problem is insufficient energy, insufficient clarity, insufficient timing, or insufficient readiness. But the real problem is the terror of choosing without guarantees. Life demands movement under uncertainty, and the untrained man keeps asking uncertainty to become certainty before he moves. It will not. A disciplined man attacks this differently because he understands that decisions are not sacred ceremonies requiring perfect emotional conditions. They are acts of command made with incomplete information, corrected through feedback, and strengthened through ownership. He does not ask for total certainty before stepping forward. He asks what the next controllable action is. He does not worship the fantasy of the perfect decision, because the perfect decision often exists only in hindsight, polished by outcomes that could not have been known at the start. He chooses, observes, adjusts, and continues. That cycle builds power because movement produces information that thinking alone cannot access. A man standing still can imagine 10 possible roads and remain confused for years. A man walking one road discovers terrain, resistance, opportunity, danger, and correction quickly. The decision becomes less terrifying once it stops being treated as a final verdict on identity and starts being treated as the beginning of feedback. Choose, then adapt. That is how capable men are built.
Carol Dweck spent her career studying how people respond to difficulty, and she uncovered something that should change how you live. The men who avoided challenges to protect themselves from failure did not come out ahead. They fell behind the ones who tried and failed openly, and the gap widened with every passing year. Avoidance felt safe in the moment, like a wise hedge against humiliation, but it was quietly compounding into the very ruin it promised to prevent. You have been running this strategy your whole life, declining the hard things, the visible things, the things where you might be seen falling short, and you called it caution. It was never caution. It was a slow-motion surrender dressed up as prudence, and the bill arrives later with interest in the form of a life that never became anything. There are two ways a man can hold his own abilities, and the difference shapes everything downstream. One man believes his talent is fixed, a offset quantity he was born with, which means every challenge becomes a verdict on his worth. The other believes ability grows through struggle, which means every challenge is just information, just reps, just the friction that builds capacity. Dweck called these the fixed and the growth mindset, and the man trapped in the first one cannot afford to try hard things, because failing would expose the limit he is terrified to discover. So he avoids protecting an image instead of building a self. The man with the growth mindset fails constantly and is undisturbed by it, because to him failure was never a judgment. It was always just the cost of getting stronger, paid gladly. Think about what avoidance is actually purchasing. You skip the attempt, and in exchange you get to keep believing you could have succeeded. The unopened business stays a guaranteed success in your imagination. The book unwritten remains a masterpiece in your head. The man you never approached would surely have said yes. Avoidance lets you keep the fantasy intact, and that fantasy feels better than the risk of a real-world no. But notice the trade. You are exchanging a real life for an imaginary one, swapping the chance at actual achievement for the comfort of untested potential. And untested potential is worthless, a currency that buys nothing, spends nowhere. The graveyard is full of men who died with their unopened ventures and unwritten books, still perfect in their minds, having never once let reality test what they were too afraid to attempt. Self-handicapping is the technical name for one of the ugliest games men play. You give yourself an excuse before you even begin, a reason ready in case you fail. You go out drinking the night before the interview. You start the project too late on purpose. You half commit to the training so that when you fall short, you can tell yourself you never really tried. Psychologists have watched men do this for decades, sabotaging their own efforts to protect a fragile ego from a clean verdict. Because if you did not really try, then the failure does not count, and your secret belief in your own greatness survives untouched. This is cowardice, operating at a level below your own awareness. The man who gives everything and fails learns something real. The man who handicaps himself learns nothing except how to lie to himself more convincingly next time. A boxer who never enters the ring keeps a perfect record. 0 wins, 0 losses, an unblemished sheet that means absolutely nothing. He can tell himself he might have been a champion, and no one can disprove it, including him. Meanwhile, the fighter who steps in and loses, who gets dropped and humiliated in front of a crowd, walks away with something the avoider will never possess. He knows what he is made of. He has data. He has scars that taught him exactly where his defense breaks and what he needs to fix. The losses written on his record are not marks of shame. They are the receipts of a man who showed up, and every one of them made him harder to beat. The clean record of the man who never fought is not purity. It is emptiness wearing the costume of caution.
A comfortable illusion often feels more protective than a painful answer. While the question remains unanswered, the ego can decorate itself with possibility. You can say you might be gifted, might be different, might be built for something rare, might be capable of more than your current life shows, and none of those claims can be proven false because they have never been forced into combat. That is the seductive part. The mind prefers an untested dream over a tested limitation because an untested dream still feels infinite. Yet infinite potential without action becomes a beautifully furnished prison. You sit inside it admiring what could happen while the years pass like guards changing shifts outside the door. No one had to defeat you. The question defeated you because you refused to answer it. The test is brutal because it removes poetry from self-image. A man can spend years crafting a private mythology around his future, telling himself he is smarter than his results, deeper than his discipline, more capable than his output, more powerful than his habits, and more dangerous than his current life reveals. Then action enters and speaks without flattery. The work does not care what you believed about yourself. The market does not care what you planned. The gym does not care what you intended. The blank page does not care what you imagined. Reality asks one thing: can you perform? That question feels cruel only to the person who has spent years hiding behind identity instead of building evidence. To the disciplined, reality is not cruel. It is clean. It gives feedback. It tells the truth. It shows where the blade is dull. There is a strange kind of suffering that belongs only to the unattempted life. It is not the sharp pain of failure. It is not the temporary humiliation of missing publicly. It is the slow infection of not knowing. The unanswered question follows you everywhere, during quiet nights, during other people's victories, during boring routines, during moments when life feels smaller than it should. A thought returns. What if I had tried? What if I had taken it seriously? What if I had committed for 1 year without escape? What if the thing I feared was never failure, but finding out? That question becomes heavier with age because time removes options without asking permission. One day, the fantasy no longer feels inspiring. It feels insulting. It stands there as evidence that you protected an image while sacrificing a life. Taking the swing changes the entire relationship with yourself, even when the swing misses. A missed attempt gives data. It reveals weakness. It exposes the missing skill. It shows the gap between desire and ability. It gives you something solid to train against. That is valuable. Far more valuable than sitting untouched inside a fantasy where everything is possible because nothing has been measured. A failed attempt can be dissected, corrected, strengthened, repeated, and eventually transformed into competence. An avoided attempt cannot be improved because it never entered reality. You cannot sharpen a blade that remains in the sheath forever. You cannot build courage around an imaginary battle. You cannot become excellent by protecting yourself from the very feedback that excellence requires. The fear of being average becomes powerful only when average is treated as a permanent sentence rather than a current measurement. If the first attempt reveals mediocrity, good. Now the lie has been removed. Now the work can begin honestly. Average at the beginning means very little. Average after refusing to improve means everything. A man who discovers he is not naturally exceptional has not been condemned. He has been given a clean diagnosis. He now knows that fantasy will not save him, talent will not carry him, and vague potential will not produce results. He must build, he must repeat, he must study, he must bleed through boredom, he must return after embarrassment. That is where real superiority is forged, not in being gifted before the fight, but in becoming dangerous because the first defeat did not break command. A hidden arrogance often lives inside the refusal to try. It pretends to be fear, caution, realism, or timing, yet beneath it sits a demand to be great without enduring the humiliation of the beginner. You want the crown without the awkward first step. You want the identity without the apprenticeship. You want the proof without the risk of being seen struggling. That is not humility. That is vanity wearing a disguise. The beginner stage is sacred because it forces the ego to bow before reality. It teaches patience. It teaches accuracy. It teaches respect for skill. It teaches that excellence is not a personality trait, but a construction project. The man who cannot tolerate being bad at something important will remain trapped in things that do not matter, because only meaningless pursuits protect him from exposure. The world does not need your protected potential. It needs your expressed capability. It needs the work finished, the skill developed, the courage demonstrated, the service delivered, the problem solved, the body trained, the truth spoken, the craft sharpened. Potential sitting quietly inside you contributes nothing. It feeds only the ego. Capability, on the other hand, enters the world and changes conditions. This is why the swing matters, not because every attempt will succeed, but because every attempt transfers energy from imagination into reality. The act itself begins converting a private dream into public evidence. That movement is where power begins. You stop being a man who thinks about becoming something and start becoming something through contact, resistance, and correction.
Somewhere along the way, you learned that big moves require approval. As a child, they did. You could not act without a parent's yes, could not move without permission from someone bigger, and that arrangement was correct for a boy who knew nothing of the world. But you carried the wiring into adulthood without noticing, and now you stand at the edge of your own life, still waiting for a voice that will never speak. You draft the plan and wait for someone to validate it. You feel the pull toward a different life and look around for a face that says go. The waiting feels responsible, like due diligence, like maturity. It is none of those things. It is a grown man still raising his hand in a classroom that emptied out years ago, hoping the teacher returns to tell him. His answer is aloud. Notice what permission actually buys you, because it is not what you think. You are not really seeking wisdom or guidance when you wait for someone to bless the move. You are seeking someone to blame if it goes wrong. If the authority said yes and it fails, the failure is partly theirs, and your ego survives intact. This is the hidden machinery beneath all that respectful waiting. It is responsibility laundering, an attempt to act without owning the outcome, to move while keeping an exit where you can say they told me to. But a life built this way is not yours. You are renting your decisions out to other people, so you never have to stand fully behind them. And a man who will not stand behind his own choices will never build anything that requires him to stand behind anything. Picture a man at 50 who still has not made the move he dreamed of at 25. Ask him why, and the answers come smooth, polished by decades of repetition. The timing was never right. The people around him did not support it. He was waiting for the market, the season, the sign. What he will never say, because he cannot see it, is that he was waiting for a permission that was always his to grant, and never did grant himself. The tragedy is not that he lacked the ability. It is that he handed the authority over his own life to phantoms, to a chorus of approval that existed only in his imagination, and they kept him obedient and small for 30 years. Do not become this man. The permission slip has been on your desk the whole time, blank, waiting for the only signature that was ever required. There is a reason the people around you may never give you the blessing you are waiting for, and it is worth understanding coldly. Your growth threatens the arrangement they have with you. The friends who like you exactly as you are, the family who has a role carved out for you, the partner who fell for the current version and is unsettled by the one trying to emerge. They are not villains, but they have an interest in your staying the same, and waiting for their approval to change is like asking the gods to approve your escape. The blessing will not come from the people most invested in your remaining where you are. It can only come from you, and the moment you understand that the approval you crave is structurally unavailable, you are free to stop seeking it and start moving without it. Authority is a costume more often than a substance. The boss, the expert, the guru you are waiting to validate your move. Look closely, and you will often find a frightened person improvising, no more certain than you, just better at appearing certain. You have been granting these figures a power they do not actually possess, treating their approval as if it carried some weight your own judgment lacks. It does not. They do not know your life, your hunger, your particular calling, the way you know it in the quiet hours when no one is performing for anyone. The deference you pay them is a habit from childhood, when the adults really did know more. But you are the adult now, and the strange vertigo you feel realizing no one is coming to bless your choices is not a problem. It is the feeling of freedom arriving, and most men mistake it for fear.